Wow, this is a really powerful speech that Melanie Phillips just gave at the Rage Against the Hate conference. It's doing the rounds online, shall we say, at the moment. People pro-Israel, against Israel, but they're all talking about it. And in this speech, Melanie Phillips explains the background to the reaction of October 7th, how it is that the West has created a society in which its elites end up siding with enemies of the West and enemies of Israel. She explains how this has happened, but also what she recommends needs to be done at an ideological as well as practical, pragmatic level. Have a watch of this really important speech, and then I'll see you on the other side.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is happening to us in the Jewish world is unprecedented. It is a global onslaught on the entire Jewish world. It is an onslaught that was triggered by the October 7 atrocities, triggered by Islamists who believed and still believe that their moment had come because they had breached Israel's security, hitherto thought impregnable even by them. They believed and still believe that the defeat of the Jews presaged the defeat of the Christians. First, Israel would be destroyed, and then the West. And they still believe that. The crowds on the streets of London and other cities who are demonstrating allegedly in favor of Palestine are actually demonstrating their power over the West, that they feel that their moment has come to finally launch, having launched the final onslaught on the West, which will succeed. These demonstrations are delirious, and they were delirious when they started on October the 7th, before the Israelis had stopped even being slaughtered. They were on the streets of London in a delirium. We are going to win this. This is our final battle. And that delirium continues horribly on our streets because there has been no pushback by government and other authorities. We have seen open incitement against Jews on the streets. We have seen and are continuing to see the most brazen anti-Semitism from celebrities and other public figures, which has become normalized. We have seen and are seeing this steady rise of an Islamic political bloc in Britain, and I'm afraid to say also here in America. You're a few years behind Britain, but I'm afraid it's the same thing. We are seeing an alliance, an unholy alliance between the left and the Islamists, an alliance which has turned language and thought in itself inside out to produce an image of demonic Jewish control over the world. It is as if we are living through a posthumous victory of both Stalin and Hitler. Why has this happened? There are many reasons, complicated. Holocaust guilt by the West is part of it. The idea that they can never again have the reality of the Jew as victim. They have to cast the Jew instead as the victimizer to escape their own historic guilt, not just for the Holocaust, but for centuries of Jewish persecution. We have the rise of identity politics based on the hatred of the Western nation state, the hatred of Western culture itself, which has produced for decades an onslaught by Western intellectual elites on the West's core values. And the onslaught on the West's core values has meant an onslaught on Judaism, because it is Judaism, although Christianity is, of course, the infrastructure upon which the West is based, but Christianity didn't come from nowhere. One could say Christianity was a Jewish sect that got slightly out of hand. The values that everybody in the West holds dear, secular or religious, are fundamentally Jewish values, and we're very shy of saying that. Why is all this happening? Well, I think that the Palestine cause is absolutely central. The Palestine cause, as we all know here, is based on nothing other than the destruction of the Jewish state, but more than that, it is also based on stealing the Jews' own history in the land from them. But the Palestine cause has become the cause of causes in the West, which of course is in the business of destroying its own core values, which come from Judaism. No coincidence. In my view, the Palestine cause is a form of holy war Islamic holy war, and it is a Trojan horse for the Islamization of the West. By adopting the language and the moral inversion of the Palestine cause, the West has bought into the agenda for its own destruction at the hands of Islam. This is a death wish by the West. And if you have a death wish, you cannot fight a death cult, which is what the West is facing in the forces of Islam. It cannot fight it because it no longer knows what it is. The West no longer has the will to defend itself because it no longer knows what that means. And insofar as it ever knew what it means, it has tried to destroy it by telling itself that the West is to be hated. This has created a vacuum into which has marched the Islamists to conquer the West because the West is paralyzed. So what can we do to fight back? We can do a lot to fight back, and we're not doing it. We can do a lot to fight back with a very different strategy. But unfortunately, the Jewish world has never even had a coherent strategy. Until now, the responses of the Jewish world to this, unlike, for example, Shurat Hadin, which I think is almost unique in its proactive, aggressive attempt to fight back to this. In other respects, the Jewish world's responses have been scattergun, not just ineffective, but strategically misguided. For decades, the Jewish world has allowed our enemies to frame the narrative. Our enemies have been able to hijack the language and weaponize the West's post-truth, post-moral culture to push their agenda that Israel and the Jews are on the wrong side of just about everything that is good and right and true. The world has been made to believe that peace and justice in the Middle East hinge on the Palestinians getting a state of their own. Justice for the Palestinians has been deemed to be the issue that drives all before it. By apparently denying that happy outcome, the state of Israel has come to be perceived as the enemy of humanity itself. This is the big lie that we are all up against. But the Jewish world has never identified this big lie as such and has never fought it. It has never told the world the truth. There is no such thing as Palestine. There is no such thing as the Palestinian people. The Jewish world has never told the rest of the world that the indigenous people of the land of so-called Palestine are the Jews, that the Jews are the only people who have any entitlement to any of this land, an entitlement based in law, in history and morality, and they are the only people who have an entitlement to all of it. The Jewish world has never said that. Instead, the Jewish world has gone along with the big lie, appeasing it, shaving off its most dangerous edges, but with too many Jews in the diaspora themselves falling for at least part of this lie. But now, ironically, because of this terrible war and this terrible catastrophe that happened to us on October 7, 2023, there is now an opportunity to seize back control of this narrative and reframe it in the interest of both Israel and the truth. Because of October the 7th and these past 2 terrible years, Israel and the Jewish people, I think, have profoundly changed. Israel will never be the same again. The Jewish world will never be the same again. The trauma in Israel will last forever. It has changed the Jewish people in Israel forever. The grief is off the scale. The trauma is off the scale. But out of this terrible thing has come something truly wonderful. It has produced a sense of unity as a nation. We can all see that Israel has fought in the way that it has done because it knows what it is. It is connected to its past. What we have seen is an expression of the indomitable spirit of the Jewish nation. What has been so stirring to me, and I'm possibly to all of you, is what I would consider to be a revival of an ancient, all but buried collective memory. I have been immensely moved above all by the sight of those young soldiers praying with their commanders on the eve of going into the battle in which some of them will lose their lives. I have been immensely moved and amazed by the immense demand fueling now the Israeli economy for the production of tzitzit. Who would have believed all these soldiers, most of whom are secular, have gone into battle wearing tzitzit. These are non-religious soldiers. They are wearing the tzitzit under their armor. They are wearing their collective identity as Jews next to their heart when they go to fight for their people. Because they're not just fighting for their country against an enemy that wishes to eradicate it. That is, of course, true. They are also fighting, in their own words, to defend something else, to defend the sacred history of their people. They are fighting in the honor of the sacred memory of all those ancestors going back into antiquity who kept the Jewish people alive. And now there is a spirit abroad in Israel, which people have not seen before, a spirit among younger people. They will not be diverted from defeating the enemy. It is no longer enough simply to what was called mowing the lawn, to keep the enemy down on the basis that they're always going to be there and we're always going to fight them. No, enough. We will now fight to defeat the enemy because we know that only defeating the enemy is what we should be doing. And there's been a realization that this idea of mowing the lawn, this idea of not going too far, this idea of doing what the world expects us to do, that is galut mentality, that is diaspora mentality, that is trying to please and appease the world, but the world we now understand from what we've been living through and are still living through. The world cannot be appeased, it has to be fought. It has been described, and I think most wonderfully, as a move from Talmud to Tanakh, by which I mean this. The Talmud, that collection of rabbinical ordinances which justifiably can be said to have kept the Jewish people alive since their exile from the land of Israel, is very much a diaspora mentality. It is a mentality which looks inward, which says we are up against a world which hates us, we have to protect ourselves. The Tanakh is full of stories of the Jewish people of antiquity fighting real battles, killing real people in defense of their nation and their people and their faith. And that is what has to be done. And I see that what we are seeing now in this war that has been fought is the resurrection of the Tanakh Jew, the return of the heroic Davidic warrior. Strength, not weakness. Now, the war is not over, but we've seen that Israel has amazingly become the strongest power in the region, victories that could never have been imagined. So Israel has a lesson too for the West in how to fight an enemy, but it has a much deeper lesson for the West. We know the West needs Israel, despite what it's saying about Israel. The West needs Israel more than Israel needs it for military intelligence, for military hardware, in military intelligence, for Jewish genius. But beyond that, the West needs Israel for the moral and cultural lesson that Israel is currently teaching the West. Look at Israel's birth rate. It is not a small detail. 3 to 4 children per child. It's not because the Haredim are having so many children. You may be either horrified or delighted to learn that the average Haredi woman who was giving birth to an average of 12 babies per woman is now giving birth to a mere 8 per woman. This birth rate of 3 to 4 children is being fueled by secular people, modern Orthodox people. It's being fueled by the idea that they want to have Israeli children because they want Israel to continue. Why do they want to have Israeli children and want Israel to continue? Because they believe in it, they love what it represents, they understand it represents the Jewish people, they love the Jewish people, they want the Jewish people to continue.
Qatar, a gleaming nation on the Arabian Peninsula, all glass towers and gold-plated excess, where the super-rich jet in for the art fairs and World Cups, where Western universities open campuses and diplomats toast to partnership. But look closer at the glittering mirage, and the shimmer reveals something sinister. For 2 decades, this tiny state has been executing the greatest con in modern geopolitics, convincing the world it's a bridge between civilizations, while secretly bankrolling the arsonists on both sides. The name Qatar should make Western leaders shudder. Instead, they shake hands with its emirs, park fighter jets on its soil, and call it an ally. On October 7, 2023, the mask slipped, as 1,200 souls were slaughtered in Israel in a symphony of savagery orchestrated by Hamas, the world saw where the terrorist leaders lived, not in tunnels beneath Gaza, but in luxury villas in Doha, under Qatar's protection. And as the bodies were being counted, Qatar's leaders didn't condemn the massacre, they called for restraint. This is the untold story of the Gulf's master deceiver, how a nation smaller than Connecticut is playing the West for fools. As you are watching this, billions are flowing from Doha into extremist networks, while Western elites cash Qatari checks and sing its praises. In this JTV Plus documentary, we follow the money, we expose the double game, and we ask the question that should haunt every Western capital: how are we letting them get away with it? To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.
What Israel is showing the West is that only by connecting to your past, to your history, will you ensure you have a future. To have a future, you have to want to have a future. The West needs this lesson to survive, but many diaspora Jews need to learn it too, because too many diaspora Jews have drunk the Kool-Aid. Too many diaspora Jews have been seduced by the liberal universalist narrative of the United States Democrats, the United Kingdom's Labour Party, Australia's Mr. Albanese, Canada's Mr. Carney, the narrative of the Brotherhood of Man, Kumbaya, John Lennon's Imagine, a world without religion or nation, a world in which there is nothing to fight or die for. That is the mantra of the modern Western liberal. Israel knows there is everything to fight and die for. Israel is teaching the West that Israel is a nation whose identity is rooted in a history based on the faith of a people in the land. Jews and non-Jews need to understand that this Judaism, represented by Israel, gave the West its civilized values, values such as respect for every human life made in the image of God, the priority of justice and compassion, moral responsibility. To fight, you need to know and love your identity. Israel gets it. Now, diaspora Jews need also to realize you are not just Americans with Judaism added on. In Britain, they're not just British Jews with Judaism added on. They are part of the British people, you are part of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, and that should come first. First and foremost, you are Jews. Everything else is secondary. Now, this means a change of strategy completely. It means changing from defense to offense. I don't mean offensive, I mean offense in a different way. Supporters of Israel have always played defense. This means that we all argue on the ground defined by our enemies. We're feeding the Gazans, not starving them. We're not committing genocide or war crimes, we're the victim of these things. Once you're on the ground defined by your enemies, you've lost the argument before you've even started. It's just like, when did you stop beating your wife? We've been answering that question for decades, and we wonder why we have lost the argument. Instead, it means taking the initiative by attacking our opponents and doing so on the ground where their vulnerabilities lie, attacking them on their own territory, telling the Western public directly how their media and governments are lying to them. And that means telling the truth for once about what Israel is. Start telling the truths never told. Address head-on the basic lie of Palestine. Call out Muslim anti-Semitism, a forbidden topic by the Jewish community leadership in Britain. Never mention Muslim anti-Semitism. Islamophobia is the same as anti-Semitism. We're all basically facing the same enemy. Really? What a terrible thing our community leadership has done to us. We should be publicizing every statement. We should be publicizing every single statement that the Palestinian Authority is channeling Nazi tropes of Jew hatred. And above all, we should start, for once, properly promoting the love of Judaism, the love of Israel, and the love of Jewish people among our Jewish young. I don't know what they're teaching them in the Jewish schools, but they're not teaching them what they need to know to fight this properly. The West is beginning to wake up horribly late to the threat of Islamization in its midst. America, where this process is not as far as advanced as it is in Britain, but it is nevertheless making steady inroads, needs to do much more than it has done. In conclusion, Israel is not just holding the line for the West, militarily speaking, in the Middle East. It is battling the very same Islamist forces that are now achieving critical mass in the West and increasingly threaten its identity and way of life. Israel is not the problem. Israel is the West's solution. That is the message that the Jewish world should be pushing at every opportunity to reframe the narrative, telling the West that Israel defeats its enemies because it has a will to live. That is because it knows what it is, it loves what it is. By contrast, the West has told itself it hates what it is, it no longer even knows what it is. This is a recipe for cultural suicide. The West is unable to confront the Islamist death cult because it has a death wish itself. Israel is telling the West, you should choose life, and this is how you do it. In my view, this is an absolutely seismic point in Jewish history. This is the Jewish moment. We must rise to it. I'm Yisrael Chai.
Well, it's a really powerful speech with, I think, some really excellent analysis from Melanie. One area in which I would offer maybe a bit more nuance is that she says the West needs to rediscover the ideas of Judaism that it's built upon. And yes, there's many elements that we welcome and support that the West was built upon that are Jewish. However, we must remember that it is a Judeo-Christian culture. And there are some elements of Christianity, which obviously there's huge overlap with Judaism because we share a good chunk of a similar holy text. But there are elements in which Christianity could, with certain readings, lend itself to hostility towards Israel. Now, by the way, I know there's a great amount of our viewers who are Christian who are deeply supportive of Israel and the Jewish people. But you all know all too well that sadly there's a very dark history of segments of Christian denominations who have turned against Israel, and that's partly because of the replacement theology. This idea that the Jews are no longer God's chosen people, that God has somehow managed to do away with his everlasting covenant. But so when she's right to say that we need to discover the Judeo parts of biblical morality if the West wants to survive, thrive, and certainly from Israel's perspective. But we also have to recognize, I think, that there are some parts of Western society, Western roots, that, unless we deal with them, also lend themselves towards hostility to Israel. The moral element of Christianity, which sometimes goes in this direction, that also can be a problem that modern Western liberalism carries, is this idea of preference for the meek, the victim, the suffering, which is fine, and that you should have concern for the oppressed. Judaism was the first to teach that. But sometimes it can glorify restraint or self-sacrifice at a level that's suicidal, that's not good. That says, no, well, ultimately, you just have to, as long as your soul is fine in the next world, just turn the other cheek. Judaism would say, listen, if you can just be the bigger man and it doesn't cause you any hurt or harm, or your family any hurt or harm, to turn the other cheek, fine, be the bigger man. But if it's going to affect you, if they're going to try and kill you, if they're going to do terrible things to you, you have a duty to stand up, because we're not trying to get to heaven, we're trying to bring heaven down to earth. And that sometimes means, well, it actually by definition means fighting evil. And if people think, oh, well, I just prefer peace, I'm a pacifist. I would even say to the pacifists, do you believe in fixing the world? If they say yes, if they believe in defeating evil and bringing more good to the world, then you believe in war. That is what war is. We would hope that it often doesn't descend to a military physical fighting level, but sometimes it has to, when the enemy is seeking military physical fight. And so that is why I think sometimes Western societies can lend themselves towards hostility to Israel, because they themselves haven't got their heads screwed on when it comes to war morality. So that's the first key point that I wanted to make. that I think we need to just have clarity on, so we can explain that clearly and provide that morality to the Western world, who I think sometimes get a bit confused about this, and that's why they end up becoming critical of Israel and losing their moral clarity about the conflict. But there's one other element as well that's really important. Melanie said earlier in the speech that part of the problem is that the anti-Israel side have convinced the world that the Jews are thieves, that the Jews are somehow the reason why they're there in the land is because they stole the land from the Palestinians and they displaced them, and they really don't have a right to be there. And this all goes back to that original sin of what happened in 1948. It's so flawed on so many levels. One of the key things I mentioned is that, so if this is just about Palestinian resistance, why were there pogroms and murders and massacres against the Jews living in the land of Israel in the 1920s or the 1830s? Explain that one to me. What were they resisting then? There was no Zionism then, no state of Israel then. So it's obviously nonsense, but at a deeper level, it's a spiritual fight. And for all our arguments of, well, we got this land legally and we have a historical connection, all those things, yeah, they're fine. But our winning argument, the argument that ultimately the world is waiting for, is actually the same argument that we will hear the Muslims say in their heart of hearts. They believe that it's their land, the Islamists, because they think that the Jews are no longer God's chosen people, that Islam, any territory that was once under Islam should always be under Islam, that Islam has to dominate the world. And they think it's their religious duty to do it. And we should look at this land the same way, because ultimately our slam dunk claim to this land is because God gave it to us. And I find it really interesting that Jews in the days and weeks leading up to October 7th, it was leading up to the High Holy Days, and then October 7th occurred during our festivals of our holy festivals. It was Simchat Torah, which is sort of the end stage of all the High Holy Day celebrations. And that's when October 7th happened. And we were reading in the build up to that every day in synagogue, chapter 27 of Psalms, Tehillim in Hebrew. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? When evildoers draw near to me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies against me, they will stumble and fall. If a camp encamps against me, my heart shall not fear. If war would rise up against me, in this I trust. One thing I ask of the Lord, that I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. And, I heard one of the hostages say that he actually kept this with him. He'd been saying it, and so he made sure to keep saying it as he went into captivity. It's amazing. It even talks about God's sukkah, his Sukkot of protection. And we were, of course, celebrating Sukkot at the time. But, one thing I find really interesting here, because for me, the more I think about this, the more I think that this chapter in Psalms so relates, and maybe it was written in some way prophetically to our times, to what happened then on October 7th. But one of the lines that I think towards the end, which is so striking, is the third last verse, where it says in Hebrew, I'll just read you the Hebrew first, Al titneni benefesh sarai, do not deliver me to the desires of my adversaries, ki kamu vi eidei sheker vifeach Hamas, because false witnesses and speakers of evil have risen against me. And what the language for evil that has risen against me is Hamas. The word Hamas here, Fifer Hamas, means one who breathes out violence. It means cruelty, violence, injustice, malice, wrongdoing. So it talks about this Hamas enemy, right? This is written by King David. But what I find even more striking is that what is this speaker of evil doing? What are they doing? They are false witnesses. Eidei Sheker. Think about that. What is Hamas' main claim in the world of the public arena, the world of its PR? What is the Palestinian cause about? They're saying the Jews stole the land. Well, guess what? They're being false witnesses. That's what, at its root, the Palestinian cause is about. They're false witnessing the idea that somehow the Jews are the thieves of the land, when it turns out that actually they are the false witnesses because they are the thieves. They do not have the right to the land. Jews are willing to have non-Jews living in the land as long as they don't want to create a society that or believe in ideology that wants us dead or goes against our values. So we're not saying they can't, they don't have a right to live among us if they genuinely want to live in their own peace and cooperation with us. But the idea is that if they want to claim that they are that the Jews are the thieves and they are the rightful owners and inheritors, it's ridiculous. You're being a false witness. God assigned the land of Israel to the people of Israel thousands of years ago. And the only sovereign state that's ever been there is a Jewish one. That's because that's the only kind of sovereign state the land will accept and tolerate. It's really that simple. So just want to go a little bit deeper for you because as always, these things always do go a lot deeper. And we need to have that biblical grounding in order to help us stave off all these lies. That truly is is the only way that can defeat an enemy that also is religious in nature. A quick message. We all hear about the Palestinian displacement or Nakba of 1948. But there was another, even greater displacement that we haven't been told about. Nearly 1 million Jews were expelled from Arab lands at the exact same time. Watch the trailer for our new and absolutely essential documentary called The Real Nakba. And if you want to watch the full film, just click the link below in the video description. We've all been told about the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948. Around 700,000 Arabs were displaced. But here's what you're rarely told. That displacement didn't come from some Jewish plan for genocide. It wasn't Israel's goal. It wasn't Israel's desire. It happened because Arab leaders launched a war of annihilation. They tried to wipe out the newborn Jewish state, vowing to drive the Jews into the sea. And in the chaos of that war, people fled. Many because their leaders told them to, promising they'd return after victory. But the term Nakba was originally used to describe the fact that the Arabs lost the war, not the displacement. Now the term describes the displacement of war used as a political weapon against Israel. But there was another Nakba you haven't been told about. A catastrophe rooted not in the fog of war, but in the clear, deliberate desire for persecution and genocide. It happened at the very same time, and it led to even more displacement. Yet most of the world has never heard of it. Over 850,000 Jews, more than the number of displaced Arabs, were driven from their homes across the Arab world. Communities that had thrived for millennia were uprooted overnight. Families stripped of citizenship, of property, of dignity, assaulted, expelled, forced to flee with nothing but their faith. Why? Because they were Jews. Because Israel dared to exist. Because the Arab League openly orchestrated it, drafting plans in 1947 to freeze Jewish bank accounts, seize property, and intern Jews as enemy nationals. This is the real Nakba, a catastrophe born of pure anti-Semitism. In this JTV documentary, we'll journey country by country, from Baghdad to Cairo, from Sana'a to Tripoli, uncovering buried truths and survivor voices. And no, this isn't a tale of victimhood, it's a saga of endurance, courage, and triumph. Because the Jewish people didn't just survive this Nakba, we rebuilt, we came home. In Israel, our phoenix soared from the ashes. So buckle up and let's dive in. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.